So kind of coming off of our this morning's keynote address, kind of changed our thinking about really what is possibilities when you put your head to it. We had the good fortune of being able to put together a panel of distinguished speakers that will allow us to just, with the audience, come out and just talk about the next 5 to 10 years. Talk about what's on the owners, the stockholders, the investors, the engineering, procurement, construction concerns within our industry. What the leadership of that, what's on their minds the next 5 to 10 years, and what are some of the things that are going around that could actually be a different path for us moving forward. So it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce our panel and the gentleman that we kind of persuaded or drafted to moderate that group. And I think you're going to find the discussions and the questions very good, and it's an interactive opportunity for you to be able to participate and all of us together grow and become more of what we really see the future to be. So with that, let me introduce our moderator, and as I introduce you, gentlemen, just come on up on the stage and take your seat. Our moderator is Dan Luma, who is currently the president for Kiewit Engineering, providing oversight and leading strategic planning for market development, business development for power, oil, gas, and infrastructure engineering. He's been with Kiewit a long time, since '98. He's a professional engineer, electrical engineer, and then also holds his master's in global energy. So he's also pretty darn good at working with people and kind of getting the best out of them. I know that for sure because I worked for him for a long time. And he poked at me until I gave him the answer I needed to give him. So I think he's going to be great at it. Our first guest that I want to introduce, and before you come up, Greg, allow me to see if I can find it. Okay, Greg, who is currently the Chief Executive Officer and President of Andeavor, which used to be Tesoro, had the privilege of being in New York City this morning, not yesterday or last week, this morning, to do the opening bell for the stock exchange to announce that change in name formally. So he has had a busy day, if you could imagine, going from New York City Stock Exchange to this wonderful stage on the same 6-hour, 8-hour period. So with great pleasure, I'd like to bring Greg up to stage. Our other panel member, who comes from General Electric,
That's a great picture.
Karl, has currently been challenged with several important assignments at General Electric Power. He began his career in '71, spent a lot of years with Bechtel, holding a lot of senior leadership roles at Bechtel, infrastructure, oil, gas, and nuclear. And recently, or in the last few years, has become a part of the General Electric senior leadership team involved in the EPC global construction. So it's with great pleasure, Karl, join us. So there's a man here that's CEO and president of the Peter Kiewit Company, and has been involved in one way or another with Kiewit for over 35 years, is responsible now for some 50 to 60, depending on what year it is, million man-hours of direct hire construction in North America, along with a vast array of engineering services. This gentleman has seen the industry evolve not only in the hydrocarbon molecule space and power, but he's also seen the industry grow tremendously in many other market segments. So he's one of the CEOs on the panel that has a diverse view of the whole world of EPC construction in every market segment, from tall buildings to bridges to power plants to refineries. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Bruce Grewcock. So we needed somebody that was dynamic from Kenda's world, because Kenda did such a good job. One way I knew that we could say thank you, Kenda, is bring her boss on the stage. So in addition to that, Ray Kowalik, who is currently Chief Executive Officer of Burns & McDonnell, leading over 7,500 employees and hitting a revenue of close to $3 billion. It gives us great pleasure from Kansas City to have his perspective and join the stage. So welcome, Ray. Great. You guys look really handsome up here. Dan?
All right, very good. Thanks, Bob.
Don't start any fights.
All right, well, as Bob said, we're very excited to have a very diverse panel. Our panelists represent, from Greg's perspective, our owners, our clients, many of us, between Bruce, Ray, and Karl, more of the EPC side. Karl, EPC as well as equipment provider, but has a long background in EPC. So really looking to get a diverse point of view here from our panel. So really just to kind of tee things off, we heard Stephen's talk this morning. None of us are happy from a broad perspective with the performance of our industry. And to quote a recent CII study, 975 projects completed by 64 owner-operators concluded that over 70% of the projects failed to achieve their FID authorizations by over 10%. And if you look at on the EPC side, the publicly traded EPCs, there's not 10% to spare. The average returns, if you look at the financials, are about 3% margins. So, and you heard Bob's opening statement. If you're looking for a 18% EBITDA and you take a 10% haircut, the financials just don't work out. So, in light of that kind of background, I asked each one of the panelists to just give us a few comments on what steps do you think the industry needs to take to make capital projects more successful for all stakeholders, and then maybe what are some steps that you're doing within your organization that might be transformative and disruptive, as Stephen opened up with this morning. So we're going to start with Greg from Andeavor.
Thanks, Dan. So maybe before I offer comments, I just provide a little background about the company. Today was a very special day for our company, as was mentioned earlier. After 50 years, we elected to change the name of the company. And the reason we wanted to change the name of the company is as we look to the future and the type of people that we want to be able to attract, especially into the energy business, we felt like we needed a new identity that we could really focus on how we do things. Less on what we do, but more on how we do things, so that we believe that could create a very powerful company to be able to do that. And so we chose to create a new identity, and we're able to kind of have a celebration today by doing that on the New York Stock Exchange. And just some background as a company. So we have a refining marketing company, and we also have a logistics company. Our refining and marketing company's capital budget is probably somewhere in the area of about $1.3 to $1.5 billion a year. We do about $500 million of major maintenance, and our logistics company does about $1 billion of project work each year also. So we have a number of different things going on, and for us to really create value, we truly believe that organic projects, which to me are ideas, it's having ideas that then we can go in and execute is one way that we can really create shareholder value. And when I look at the question you asked, Dan, I think it's good to look at an analogy and For those that are maybe familiar with the cycling team in the UK, they went back and they've become one of the premier cycling teams in the world. And one of the things that they've done is they've adopted this process where all the small little changes that you can do, the cumulative impact of all of those small changes can become transformational. And when you look at doing major projects, and that if you go back in and you look at all the little things that can be done along every aspect of that, if you can drive improvements in all of that, you can make transformational changes in what you need to have happen. Because for us, you talked about the profitability of the EPC companies. Ours is equal to or less than that. And the last thing that we can afford to do is go do a project that we think is going to cost us $500 million and have it cost 25% more because we just destroyed absolutely all of that value. So to me, I just think it's how you look at what you do and the idea of a small little changes. And that's kind of how we run our company, because we believe we can create tremendous value by driving those changes. And I think looking at projects that way would probably add tremendous value.
Okay, good. Karl, what about from GE's perspective?
Quite a bit. I was asked, though, to remind you first that I'm a stand-in today. Rod Christie was to make this presentation. Rod is a peer of mine in GE. He's not here because he's at the first board meeting in Italy of our newly formed Baker Hughes GE. And you talk about transformation. Baker Hughes GE can now provide services from the reservoir to the refinery. That's transformative in itself. So as was discussed, I spent 43 years at Bechtel, and I was fat, dumb, and happy retired. I got a call from GE because they were going through another transformation that was bringing Alstom into the GE business through an acquisition in 2015. I was asked to help integrate it, as well as, once it closed, sit over the top of it and make sure that risk associated with about a $30 billion portfolio of capital projects was done properly. Heretofore, GE, mainly known as an equipment supplier, world-class equipment supplier, but now about a top 30 EPC sits inside of GE. One of the things we started seeing in 2016 was that customers, we've seen it for a long time, we're trying to move more and more risk toward the OEM and toward the contractor. What we started seeing in 2016 was a kind of a movement toward the OEM as an integrator. In other words, the OEM as the project developer and executor. So that was something that we felt was transformative in itself, and we better be ready for it. So what I'd like to talk to you about over the next few minutes is what we've been doing, because it's really getting ready for the transformation, but also back to basics. So I hired a world-class team, EPC team, to look at 4 pillars. One pillar being the proposal, another being execution excellence, third, functional excellence, and the fourth is something that actually we tried to do at Bechtel, never did successfully, enterprise risk management, which is looking at the whole portfolio from the top down, bottom up, and I'll talk a little bit about each one. In what we call the PRB, the Proposal Risk Board, we look at all proposals in the GE family, all 7 businesses that do turnkey, and look for risks. And in doing so, my team has to approve all turnkey or turnkey with partner projects. In doing so, we've been able to move an organization that was heretofore equipment supplier to more of an EPC mindset. Looking at T's and C's, teaming, subcontracting, we work around the world, just about every country. The owners are driving toward low cost, so we're forced to use smaller subs, smaller partners, a lot of risk associated with that. The second pillar is execution excellence. And this is where my team, working with the 7 businesses that execute turnkey projects, overview their ongoing work, help them understand what risks are inherent to those kinds of projects, and help them mitigate, including deep dives on projects that we foresee could be problematic. Functional excellence, I think, is something that actually the panel before us talked about, some back to basics. During the transformation period, we feel as though we've got to get functionally great. We've got to have functional excellence across all of our functions. And we're not there yet. We're not ready for the transformation. So we're focused for every function from womb to tomb, the entire project life cycle. We have communities established in the organization, and we're working hard on developing more A-teams. All the customers want A-teams. We're working hard on global resource management, fungibility of resources. Lots to do here. And the last pillar I'm kind of the most proud of, and we look at all of the $30 billion portfolio. We look at all the projects, looking specifically at about 9 risks, including country risk, technology risk, and we trend and track for each one of the 7 businesses where those risks are heading. And what it's allowed us to do is inform the businesses that maybe we're doing too much work in high-risk locations, or maybe we shouldn't sell another project with a product that hasn't been proven yet. So it allows us to inform the businesses, it allows us to inform the board, and so far it's really paid off. So these are just some of the things we're doing to get ready for what we think is going to be more OEM as integrator.
Okay, thanks, Karl. That's one thing, when we were preparing for this panel, I was really surprised. We've worked with GE for decades, and I was really surprised that GE had a portfolio of $30 billion worth of EPC projects. So interesting note there. So Bruce, what about from Kiewit's perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. When I was flying down here this morning, there was an article that caught my attention in the paper this morning, unfortunately, about another problem in this industry, the broad construction industry, the news about the nuclear power plant down in South Carolina being shut down. Original estimate in 2008 was $11 billion. The cost at completion now is estimated at $25 billion. I would suggest that we as an industry, the construction industry, ought to be embarrassed by that outcome. But our business is about risk and in managing risks. It's what this is all about. And again, I had an opportunity, I wrote an article for McKinsey and Company here in June, and I talked a lot more about risk and some of the things that we see that are positive things that are addressing risk in the industry. But I would say from our perspective, and again, it's obviously very self-serving from my perspective, we at Kiewit, we're a contractor first and foremost. And so, but our thinking is along the lines of construction-driven processes. Construction-driven processes. We're encouraging our clients to come in, get us involved earlier, come up with more creative contracts, more hybrid contracts to get us involved earlier with the goal of identifying the risk, trying to eliminate the risk, mitigate the risk, and then last, okay, let's assign it to the right party that can take care of the risk. I know a senior executive at ExxonMobil, and they're a bit frustrated with our friends in the engineering community, not you, Ray, of course, but they want contractor-led projects. They have seen engineering projects or led projects around the world. They're a little frustrated by it. To that end, we at Kiewit, we've got a group that we call our ECI group, Early Contractor Involvement Group, that we've staffed with experienced construction people. Because as a contractor, we approach the whole construction thing differently than the engineers do. We come at it from a different perspective. We're fortunate also to have a large database of results of costs and schedule, how long it takes to do things. So we're really encouraging our clients, hey, get us involved early. We can give you more realistic plans and specifications, things that can be built easily and quickly. We can give you more realistic cost estimates. We've got detailed cost records. We can give you more detailed, realistic schedules. But goes hand in hand with that when you get somebody like us involved. we can bring innovation to the table. Ideas of things we've seen other places. Hey, if you did it this way, it could be done cheaper, it could be done faster. Another thing that again, as our company is changing going forward, is we are an engineering company as well. We've got about 1,500 engineers working directly for Kiewit, not as large as many of the big houses, certainly. Plus, on any given day, we're probably managing another 1,000 or so as subcontractors on our variety of projects. But our mantra inside Kiewit is it's going to be construction-driven engineering. So when Dan was given his new job, he knows it's construction-driven engineering. And really treating the contractor, is from the engineer's perspective, as a client, as well as the ultimate customer, the guy ultimately paying the bills, but treat the contractor as the customer as well. I'd say the other second big thing that we're doing that hopefully will be transformative in the industry is that we've developed a suite of software tools that now I think give us the opportunity to do some real rich data mining, to create some predictive analytic tools about what goes on in our projects. We've got a suite of tools that sort of cradle to grave now. It goes all the way from estimating through planning and controls, ties procurement, schedule, in kind of one complete package that all talks to each other seamlessly. I call it one version of the truth. And it allows us to get information, one version of the truth, but like in near real time. So when you're out there on the projects and you detect that first sign of a hiccup, you can go do something. You don't have to wait 6 weeks or something until the report comes out. You can react in more in real time. And so I guess I'd conclude my comments by saying that what I hope and believe the future of this industry is, God bless them, but more lawyers writing thicker contracts trying to push risk on us, or perhaps the purchasing agent mindset that treats what we do as kind of a commodity, because you guys build complex things, and it takes a lot of a very collaborative process. So my hope and belief for the industry going forward is a much more collaborative relationship between all the parties that come together, all the stakeholders, because again, society, in private companies or even on the public works side that we do a lot of business, they're asking us to build more complex things in difficult environments. And it takes a much more collaborative sort of a process. So that's my hope going forward, because we as an industry can't afford many more of these kind of disasters like we too often, we too routinely see.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Bruce. Ray, what are your thoughts?
Well, I want to echo a little bit about Bruce said, because I think, and I'm going to add to it, it's construction and startup and operation, right? You have to think of the end in mind when you start any project. And you look at the history of what's happened in the last few years and what happened with, I'd say, proliferation of projects and opportunities in the United States. It led to problems that our industry is facing now, and that was generally a lack of discipline. We had a lack of discipline from our EPC contractors. We had a lack of discipline from our owners. We had a lack of discipline from our supplier chains and vendors, because we took on work more than our groups could handle. And I think it was throughout the supply chain of everybody, including down to craft labor. So, I think we're all a little guilty. I think we're all a little guilty of that. I will say that, we were at Burns Mac, we were very disciplined. We very much believe that saying no is a good thing, even when an owner gets mad at us. If we can't do a good project for you, then we have to say no. And our success rate was very good, even through the boom. The other thing I think is very important is that in the last 5 years, we've really built a lot of expertise on how to do big projects. CII has done a lot of research, and we got to take that and learn from it for the next cycle of construction that starts to come. And I think it's starting to come again. And I think we got to be ready for that, and that's doing proper front-end planning. It's learning to say yes or no. It's doing realistic construction costs and schedules, and doing a great job of planning. We built our new office building, which is probably not a good example for this room, but it was an interesting example of collaboration. When you build something for yourself, you can build it. We were 50% equity owner in the building, and we were the EPC contractor, which our partner on the project was a little bit nervous about being a 50% owner and the EPC contractor. At the end of the day, they said it was the best project they'd ever worked on because we were very aligned. Every dollar we saved, we got the benefit of as the EPC contractor or as the owner, so we got to share in it. So what we did is we brought not just the owner involved, but we actually brought all our vendor community into the process. So generally, we go, this is the building we want to look at. It's a 300,000 square foot building. Here's the footprint. Here's the features we want. And come give us your best idea, value proposition to help us build our building. So we brought in, one of the classic examples were the people that were providing the skinning for our building. And they came in and said, here's the cost to do it the way you guys want it. But if you can cut 9 inches off the height of your building, we can do it in 2 panels and save you $2 million on a $70 million building. So guess what? Our architects could find 9 inches to make the building 9 inches shorter. But well, I think that point illustrated, there was a lot of smart people, construction people, engineers, but we just don't know everything. We don't know what the standard length panels from this particular supplier were to get them to our job site. So I think the other thing we got to really start thinking about, I think there are 2 other things. One is driving man hours out of our job sites. That's the most inefficient place to do work, is at our job sites. How do we get the work hours out of the job sites? And I think the real game changer for our industry, the true game changer, all of us sit in this room and we get the fruits of our rewards, right? When we do a great project, EPC contractor makes a good profit, you know, get some good bonuses to our team members, increase our equity, our stock. Owner gets a great project, they get a great rate of return, they get to hopefully maybe pocket something. We're talking about productivity at the job site. What does the worker get? What does he get at the end of the day? He gets nothing, right? You know, and I think the times have changed where it used to be you went to work to get your paycheck. That was the mindset, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's no longer the mindset. The workers understand all they get on the end of the project is a pat on the back, good job. How are we going to get them engaged in the outcome of the project so that they get the benefits and rewards that come from it? And it's tough. I know it's tough. Union workers, open shop, either one, they're transient, they come from your job, they go to the next job. Can you imagine if they all pulled together the same way our management teams did on their projects? They don't get to come to this room and learn from CII. They get to learn it from us at the job sites. You think they love that? I don't think so. I think that's the next big step change, or how are we going to get the actual workers on a job site, the labor, to get some benefit out of the projects they do.
Good, Ray. Yeah. All right, so Greg, before we dive into the EPC details, maybe go back from a business perspective, and I know that's your background. Mm-hmm. So you spoke about, you know, one of the things that you do in your organization, some of the most exciting things is create new projects and bring your ideas to fruition. So a lot of the frustration we have from the EPC side is we see a lot of our clients deferring project FID, and as we say, you know, choosing to buy versus build to create value in their organizations. What can you say, kind of conversations go on in the boardroom about buy versus build, and then what's Andeavor's position on that?
Yeah, it's when we look at value creation for us, organic projects are the best way we can create value, because we have choices, like you said. When we bought our share of businesses, we spent $9 billion last year buying businesses. So when we have to manage our capital allocation. And if you go back and you look at it, and if we can effectively execute projects, they create the most value for us. So when we, as a company, when we look at how we prioritize how we're going to spend money, our first priority is to take and invest about a third of our free cash flow in organic projects, because that is our first priority, to be able to do that. But to create value, we need to get a good net present value on that project, because the risk, as we sit up here and talk, the risk of doing a project that was going to cost X and comes in at 1.3 times X, as the owner, that our value disappeared. Because our risk, when you look at, if you draw a tornado diagram and you look at the risk on any project we do, the biggest risk we have is the market risk. So the biggest risk that we take is if it's based on the spread or something that we're trying to capture, that's the biggest risk that we have. So if that goes against us, I mean, that's tremendous negative impact on the project. The project itself, because it's all front end, if the project doesn't work out, we lose all that value right up front on the net present value. So we didn't create any value for our shareholders. So we absolutely, to deploy the capital versus our alternatives, we need really good execution on the project up front, because the biggest risk that I concern myself with is actually the market risk, because that comes over a long period of time and really to be able to capture that. And that's where timing, one of the things that's hurt us a lot is that the permitting process is so burdensome and takes so much time that by definition, when you take something and it takes you 4 or 5 years to permit it, and you had an idea, and in 5 years, the things change a lot. And all that is additional risk, that time risk, because now when you thought what value you were trying to capture has moved out even further in time, you get into projects that just don't work out. So delivering on time is super critical in a value creation process. And so what we try to do is, really go back in and define the project as best as we can, because our biggest concern is the market factors driving what we're trying to capture in the market, because that's how we're going to create value. And we expect the project to really come in on time and on budget.
So Karl, I'll direct the next one to you. So here we have an owner saying, hey, we would build more projects and our peers in the industry would go forward with more projects, which is going to help all of us if we knew the net present value was there, if we could control the risks. So Karl, I mean, your whole career in EPC projects, what keeps you up at night? What do you think the number one risks on the projects in your portfolio right now, or maybe previously in your career? And what can we do to better manage that?
Yeah, I guess it probably depends on the day of the week. I can worry about the project life cycle from developing a project to closing out a project, just like the previous panel. I think if I were to kind of generalize on a couple of things that really worry me, in our portfolio of projects, we're working in faraway places. We're working with because of the buyer's market we're working in today. We're backing into market pricing. We're working with new partners, new subs, new owners. Compliance is a concern. Ethics and compliance. New teams in new places that don't think about ethics and compliance the way we do here in Europe. That worries me a lot. We spend a lot of time vetting all of our partners, all of our owners. Development deals, we vet the developers. So we spend a lot of time worrying about that. I spend a lot of time worrying about it. I have a compliance lawyer on my staff that he's full-time worrying about ethics and compliance. I think the second thing that I worry about every day is the teams. Ray talked about how do we get the teams to own the work. Customers want our A teams. We want A teams. We don't have enough A teams. So attracting, retaining, training, career development is something I worry about a lot. You can't spend enough time worrying about it. Our work ebbs and flows. It's a reality of the work we do. So how to attract, retain, keep people interested in doing EPC projects for the rest of their career. Mm-hmm. It's something that I think about a lot.
So Bruce, you talked about early involvement and maybe building on another theme that Stephen Mulva talked about earlier, which is having an idea of the life cycle, thinking about the life cycle early on in the project development. And I know we've seen P3 projects, public-private partnership projects, really become the norm in the infrastructure world. And maybe that's, part of this. I don't know, maybe it's the whole solution, but what do you think about contractors being involved maybe in the industrial world and power and oil and gas in a similar way, and having maybe even, as Ray talked about, an equity ownership in the project?
Yeah, I certainly, Dan. In the infrastructure world, P3 is sort of the hot topic. You hear it coming out of Washington, D.C. Just a few weeks ago, I was there meeting with some folks from the Department of Transportation, the Build America Bureau, which is tasked with promoting P3s and whatnot. I'd say, I'll talk a little bit in infrastructure first and then get to some of the industrial stuff. In the infrastructure world where you have public owners, I view it as much as a political thing as an economic thing. I think they're trying to transfer political risk off to the private sector. I think there's a lot of naivete out there among public officials about what P3s are and what they're not. At their heart, they're just a financing scheme. They are also a risk transfer scheme for them in the long run. But, because they're going to pay a little bit more for the equity return, they're going to end up paying more money over time because they want their project to be or their asset to be maintained in a near new condition throughout the life of the concession. But politicians seem to kind of like it. But the biggest challenge in the infrastructure world for P3s to get beyond where just sort of this kind of idea of the day is, what's the funding stream? Where's the money going to come from to pay it back? It's just like a mortgage on your house. You can go out and remodel your kitchen and take out a second mortgage and you have a brand new kitchen, but you also have a second mortgage. And so I think that's the real challenge in the infrastructure world. Where does that money going to come from for that stream? Because there is a lot of money washing around the world that will invest in these things if they can find the funding streams. In the private world, I mean, it's a question of, what business for us. It's what business are we in? We think we're pretty good EPC contractors. I don't know anything about making petroleum products. We know very little about making electricity. We can get the plant started up and make it run. But that's not our business. And so I'm not sure, from time to time, we'll have a client will come and say will be sort of a temporary financing or whatever. And occasionally we will agree to that. But really for us to be in that business that I don't know anything about. So at least from our perspective, we kind of stick to our knitting in that world and let the folks that are in those kind of businesses take those equity risks. Because I have no idea what the market risk is in oil and gas. I can do a pretty good job with it in the EPC world.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of build upon what Bruce just talked about, because we've looked at opportunities where, especially private equity on infrastructure, logistics, say we're building a pipeline and the private equity is they say they're very interested in it. And the challenge that we run up against is when you look at the risk of delivering the return on that, particularly the requirements they have to satisfy their fund, that risk that we take every day is inconsistent with the risk that their fund allows them to take. So then they come to you and they want you to say, okay, well, you put guarantees in it for them. Well, it's not going to work that way. So I kind of agree with Bruce on when you're trying to manage that risk profile, the private-public partnerships, I just don't know of how applicable they are to the business because of risk. There's just too much risk based upon how they want to get returns.
So Ray, you told a really good example of your building, and how you had a unique position because you were in an ownership, you're an EPC company and lots of different businesses, but here you own this building and you're familiar with it. So you had a partner, but somehow you were able to get some kind of synergies there. From your perspective, Bruce, he is speaking from, most EPC contractors, we stick to our knitting, we understand our business, and we don't understand, how to sell molecules, and the same thing is true for a lot of oil companies. What do you think the right level of integration there is?
And I think there may be a little compromise position, right? Because there are parts of the project that the EPC controls and the vendor controls in supplying reliability, the product, the quality, that can theoretically become some kind of a partnership with the owners and the EPC. So I think there's an opportunity there to structure contracts where it's not, you shall meet these minimums or else you shall die, all right? That's how some of these EPC contracts are written. If you don't reach these minimums, you shall spend up to your contract value to fix it, right? So there could be a structure in place that, is somehow structured into some kind of targets of what the facility, schedule, cost, performance of the facility, that can then just be, they could be bonus penalty clauses that get you to some sharing in doing a better job. You can buy higher quality equipment, or to get better reliability. You can upsize something by a smidge just to make sure that's not your bottleneck. And there's a lot of things that the EPC firms can do if they had some benefit from it, if things went better on the project than expected. So there's the hybrid of ownership, but then there's the contractual structures where people can work together towards common goals to try to beat the performance parameters in the contracts, and then everybody can hopefully get something out of the game. So I think there's a lot of different nuances to structures that can happen. And I understand that the owner has some minimum criteria, they need a product at some point to make money and make the financials work. So I understand that there's some contractual requirements that need to be in the contract. On the equity side, I think that the interesting part, and I agree with Bruce, it's really in the public sector that I think is our great opportunity as an industry. And I think that's where the roads, the bridges, the airports spending in the United States is going out the roof. And that's happening because every airport is old and congested in America, every single one of them. And the spend there is enormous. And sometimes the dollars just aren't there. They're not there from the cities, they're not there from the federal government, and they're not there from the airports and whatever their funds are. So I think there's a lot of places in the public sector, and I agree with Bruce, it is really a risk transfer. I don't necessarily think it always comes with a premium. I think it sometimes is a premium to the end user, but I don't think it necessarily has to be if you put the structure in place. If you look at the financial structures, how much equity needs to go in, how the contracts are structured to get the guarantee back to the P3 or some hybrid model. So I think there's a lot of ways, especially in the public sector, that it could work.
Yeah, just maybe follow up on something Ray said. We're certainly seeing it in public works. Design, what they call design build, but I think it applies in EPC as well. The more prescriptive the owners are, you stifle innovation. You would be surprised how state DOTs, for example, on road and bridge projects, how prescriptive they are, because they said, this is the way we've always done it. And so we call an alternative technical concept. My word, I mean, they are very, very slow to change, and I think it stifles innovation. In the model in the EPC world, in oil and gas or power, where owners, hopefully in a collaborative way say, hey, let's work together to find a better, different way. And that's, again, folks like us getting involved early. But in the public works world, there is a tremendous amount of inertia for this is the way we've always done it. And so it stifles innovation, and it's unfortunate in our business. But the P3 model, if they design it right, or they design a design-build contract right, giving the contractor, the engineer some flexibility, they can still get what they want, they get the performance that they want, they get the longevity that they want, but they get it at a better price because we've been able to be creative and innovative.
So Greg, maybe flipping over to you, you mentioned something when we were talking earlier about you met a lot of people in the industry, really brilliant technical people in the industry, but they didn't understand how to make money on projects. And I think you just heard Bruce and Ray talk a bit about how when we get prescribed these, certain requirements, Like the wall, even the wall panel from Ray, if you prescribe a certain requirement that doesn't make sense and don't listen to the feedback, you're just driving project costs up. Maybe give me some ideas from your perspective of folks in the industry with a mindset, not how to make money on projects, but just purely technical.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Dan. I guess what I would probably do is let me give you an example. And a few years ago, we were studying the markets, and we determined that from our West Coast operations, we actually could capture an advantage to sell mixed xylenes into Asia. We had some cost advantages that we could actually capture an advantage, and and be very competitive actually, particularly with the new supply that needed to be put into the marketplace. And so, to me, and the learning and we've struggled with this project, if I had to start all over again, and this is internally, I think you may get two different outcomes. If I ask someone to say, create me a profitable mixed xylene business in Asia, or build me a mixed xylene plant, I may actually get two very different outcomes because of some of the things that everyone talked about. There may be more creativity, there may be more of a focus, and this is more from an owner standpoint, but you have to partner because we can't do that on our own. But I think it may be possible if you frame up a different question and you allow someone, and whatever EPC company they choose to work with, to say, create a profitable mixed xylene business in Asia. Maybe they'll look at the whole life cycle and the whole value creation process one way, versus if we say, our major project group, if we say we want to build this 15,000 barrel a day mixed xylene plant to take mixed xylene to Asia, and they'll come back and we'll have certain standards, and we probably put constraints on it, like you're talking about, that actually may stifle creativity, because it's not driven by creating a valuable project, it's driven by building a mixed xylene plant. And so I just think I don't have the real outcome there, but I think it is possible that if you ask a question differently and you allow people to apply their ingenuity and their creativity, and they need to understand how you make money. Because like I said earlier, if we go back in and we do a tornado diagram on the risk of any project, the biggest risk that we take is not the cost of the project. The biggest risk we take is the market risk, and which involves time and everything like that. So I don't know if that's a very good answer to your question, but I think it's a different way to think about something from our standpoint.
I think it is, and I think if EPC organizations were involved in that process and you frame the question differently, you might get a much different
I think
outcome.
you may.
So I think we've got a few more minutes left. On behalf of CII, CII is in existence to help the industry. And so from maybe starting with Greg and just go down the panel, if there was one more thing CII could do for your organization or to help the industry, what would that be?
Well, I had the opportunity to talk to Stephen Mulva before, and he talked about kind of the inclusion of the economic value proposition, not just the whole development and construction of a project. And I think being able to look at that in its entirety and help and do more benchmarking and maybe free up better ideas, I think that would be very, very valuable. Plus, I think at the same time, people, like everyone said, people are so critical for all parts of our business. I mentioned earlier, we wanted to reshape our identity to attract the right type of people, because when you say you're in the refining, marketing, logistics business, people don't knock your doors down to come working for you. But if you say this is how we do business, that we have very strong core values, that we allow people to be creative, that we allow, like Ray said, our people get bonuses, that you can create value because of challenges, and that's an important thing. So I think the people and helping attract people to the business would be incredibly valuable.
Okay, Karl?
I haven't been here in quite a few years. I'm really impressed with what's going on, and I think it's so powerful because, like the previous panel, that was back to basics, and I'm a big back to basics guy. Entire project life cycle, how you determine what's going wrong before it goes wrong, being predictive. And I think that coupled with looking over the horizon, what are the transformations that are occurring, that are fixing to occur? Some examples of the Koreans and the Chinese working right next to Kiewit in the U.S. with basically an OEM behind them. Some of these big Chinese companies, they do womb to tomb. They manufacture, they construct. So they're a force to be reckoned with, and if our data is right, I think there's going to be more of that, not less. There's going to be more of the OEM as integrator, the customer continuing to de-risk his project by moving the risk to the OEM. It was heretofore at the bottom of the pyramid. Now they're becoming the top, and hopefully it's U.S. companies that are at the top and not others. But it's a force to be reckoned with. And I think that's one of the things the CII can continue to do is help us look over the horizon.
Bruce, what do you think CII can do?
I go back to maybe where my very first comment about that nuclear plant that has proven to be another embarrassment for the industry. And I was told, I guess that last year Brendan Bechtel came and spoke at this group and gave a talk he called "The House Was on Fire" is what he called. And unfortunately, the house is still burning. And I think this group needs to be one of the leaders in the broad construction industry, from clients, owners, contractors, engineers, subcontractors, suppliers, regulators, to say, hey, we've got to get this under control. We're smart people. We all work hard. And we as a collective industry ought to be embarrassed about some of these things that happen. And so certainly this organization needs to be out on the forefront to say, because I think it touches in about everything that gets kind of built out there, unless it's maybe a simple road out, paving road out in West Texas. We usually can figure out how to do those. But as an industry, we ought to say, hey, we got to do better. And so I think this group being a leader in trying to drive those sort of collaborative sort of things to say, hey, we got to do better, because our clients can't afford 10, 15, 20% double cost overruns. So you guys all know the stories better than I. We can do better.
So Ray, after everybody else goes, you get the hard job. What's the...
Yeah, so I look at CII, by the way, it's my first meeting, and I'm very, very, very impressed with the organization. I know our company's probably been involved in around 10, 15 years, and just, I think about our organization 15 years ago from a safety perspective, and this industry from a safety perspective, and what CII has done in providing some training and best practices for safety that we've put in practice on our job sites and in our, at our office. And it's just an incredible transformation that we've made in safety results as an industry. And I understand the goal is zero. We can't pat ourselves on the back, but we have made great, great, great strides in how safe we are. I think safety, though, is an easy thing to tackle, because there's nobody that has any ulterior motive but to be safe. The moral obligation, I tell our employees, I don't care about the results. I and you have a moral obligation to every person working on our job sites, in our company, that they should go home the same way they came. And hopefully they didn't eat too much, so they don't get bigger, but just get them home the same way they came. So I think the next step for, whoops, oh, come on. This is, I said there was no alarms today.
That's no fair.
We're not expecting any alarm. That's what I think.
Is that a real or a, oh, it's already over, maybe.
We, are we good?
We were just getting ready to say something.
Oh man, I had my clothes too.
What's that? It's standby. Okay. Okay.
So we'll stand by for a minute. So
just as you were talking about safety.
Yes. So the perspective from a safety standpoint was, I think, a lot easier to tackle. So we'll wait for the next announcement. How about that?
This is a recording.
So, in conclusion, I think the last step in the equation is how we engage the workforce.
Same.
We are standing by. So,
standing by.
how we engage the workforce on the job sites. I'm a huge believer in rewarding good performance, and I think that's what America's built on. So the construction industry is built on, and how we can do that. And you know, I don't think it's any different. And this is probably two bad analogies, but when my dog comes in from outside after she has properly pottied, she gets that occasional time she gets a treat. I still pay my wife $50 when she mows the lawn. You reward good behavior. And if we can get to rewarding good behavior at the job site, I think we got it. We got it clicked.
All right, so we got a few more minutes. I understand that was a false alarm, so we're going to just power on through. You know, there was, earlier on we were talking about a lot of, in the last, say, decade, we've seen a ratcheting up of global EPC companies coming into North America to work really in all markets. And maybe we'll start down at the other end with Ray, since he loves talking over the alarm. What, maybe turn it around, what do you think about North American companies' ability to compete globally?
So, I'm sorry, I'm distracted. So, yeah, I think however your work product is, it doesn't really matter if you're efficient and how you provide your work product to your customer. I think the challenge internationally is that the way business is done outside of the United States is different. So you've got to understand all the socioeconomic risks, the political risks, the capital conversion risk, the tax risk, the way of doing business. So it is a more difficult market, and I would suggest that just because you do it well in the United States doesn't mean you're going to do it well in Canada or do it well in Mexico, that EPC firms got to learn to do it slow. If you look at the major failures, and there's a lot of EPC firms that are out of business, and it happens really quickly, is they overshoot their headlights, either with the type of projects they take, understanding the risks they're taking, and that risk profile just gets bigger and bigger as you go internationally. So it's definitely at a much more careful process, I think, when you go outside the borders of the United States. It's interesting, though, you know, you go outside the United States and you talk about risk. The people you talk to outside the United States, they say, do you realize that the most litigious country in the world is the United States? Right. But that is what we see as the norm, and we understand those risks. So they're different risks when you leave the borders, but it's not necessarily you're going to get sued. It's probably going to be you're not going to get paid, right? That's how they control that process in foreign countries. So I think you just have to go with a really good understanding of where you're doing business and why you're there.
Bruce, what do you think about North American companies?
Yeah, it's a comment. Certainly in a lot of space, certainly in infrastructure and even in other parts of our business, foreign-owned firms dominate the market for large jobs. Large European contractors, some of the Asian contractors are dominating. It's sort of I call it the dirty little secret of taxpayer-funded projects in the United States, dominated by international players. I think for our business model, we're a North American contractor, and I think for our business model, it would be virtually impossible for us to go to another country to go do something. I've always admired Bechtel and their ability to work in so many different parts of the world. I think enormously difficult. I think the barriers to entry for us would be enormous. Our model is basically built on high-priced labor and how we manage high-cost labor. You go to other parts of the world where people are getting, it's a much different model, and so it'd be very difficult for us to do it, but they're all here, so we're going to just have to buckle down and compete even harder here to protect the home turf, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So, Karl, I mean, your whole career has been with companies that have competed globally. Now with GE, what are your thoughts about what sets the organizations that you've been with apart that do, work so much globally?
Well, to me, it's a big issue. It's a big problem. And if you talk about transformation, our studies tell us that the owners are going to continue to move toward an OEM as integrator. And in a case where you've got a Chinese company that's a conglomerate, they can lose money on an EPC and still make money. It's pretty tough to compete. So we need to be better than they are. We need to have innovation. We need to know how to create certainty of outcome. They're not there yet, but they're coming. And I think when you're, as Bruce said, when you're competing with a state-owned entity, we bid a project in my last career in Abu Dhabi. We were actually bidding with GE, Westinghouse, and Areva against the Korean. 6 months into the bid cycle, the Korean took it off the street, and they're building it now. State-owned utility, and they're all over the world with that approach toward business. So it's not if it's coming, it's when it's coming, and they're just not quite there yet. They're not good enough yet. So we just have to continue to reinvent ourselves and have a better mousetrap.
So you've been talking from an EPC perspective. Greg, what do you think?
Well, I think, from our standpoint, because we have to compete, our business is a global market. So we compete in a global marketplace. And probably our biggest challenge when we have an idea and a project that we want to do is actually getting it permitted, because it takes us so long in this country, particularly certain parts of the country are a lot worse than others. So if we're, like the example I gave earlier about trying to sell a product in Asia, if we're trying to compete with the Koreans or the Chinese, then time to market and establishing that supply to the market so you can develop contracts and commercial relationships. But that project that I talked about, we've started 4 years ago trying to permit the project. And so when you're competing in a global marketplace, and in the United States, when you have to permit projects in certain states, it's almost impossible to be able to do that. We have a project we started over 4 years ago. It's not that big of it's about a $250 million project. We have already spent 20% of that project, part of it on engineering, but part of it is on advocacy and trying to get the project. Yeah, it destroys your economic value, and it makes it very difficult for us to compete. So it's a different way to look at it, but the challenge in a global marketplace, U.S., and you talked about the litigious nature of the U.S., but also part of it is just the regulatory nature. I mean, the Chinese could do something in one day that would take us 5 years.
So maybe bringing it back home a bit, the current administration has talked about $1 trillion investment in infrastructure. And I'll just open it up to any of you to talk. What are any of your organizations doing to participate in that opportunity? Bruce, I think you spent a little bit of time in Washington.
Well, show me the money. Where the money could come from for it. I mean, lots of ideas being thrown around. Everybody's afraid of raising the gas tax, which has historically funded a lot of things. Other funding, airports, Ray, you're right about airports. The nation's water system for moving stuff and the lock system is in disrepair. It's just, but show me the money. And P3 is an answer for selected sort of things, perhaps. They talk about repatriation of money that's parked overseas, maybe. So I remain a tad bit skeptical.
Yeah. I think one of the things I would add, Dan, is from our standpoint, what's more valuable to us is a lower tax rate. Because if we can pay, we're primarily a domestic company, But if we can pay competitive tax rates, it creates more free cash flow. So like I said earlier, we have lots of things that we could do that but we want to be very disciplined in reinvesting our free cash flow. Well, if we have to give less of it to the federal government, we can turn that into projects. They may be infrastructure, but they may be other things. But it's tough, when you pay the full tax burden in this country to do that. So I'm more concerned about tax rates than I am infrastructure spending, because I kind of agree with you, Bruce. Let's see what happens. Lots of talk.
Yeah, I agree with Bruce too. I don't see the federal government coming up with $1 trillion, and nothing has come out of Washington since the new administration of any consequence. They've got other battles to fight. I agree tax policy would probably be a way better one for the economy and for opportunities. The $1 trillion that was spewed in campaign rhetoric, where's the money going to come from, number one? Number two, even if they passed the bill now for funding, it would be the 2018 fiscal year. So it's a year out before that money hits the market, and so I call BS.
Another comment I think is would be a problem. Let's say they could round up the money. I'm not sure, and I'll say to the owner community, as the contractors, we could probably handle it. Maybe the engineering community. The owner community, I think, their ability to manage the project. Are there that many really high-quality project manager, project directors that can run a multi-billion-dollar program? And I think as we go around and see, they're in short supply. And I think that if to try to spend that amount of money intelligently, I think would be a real challenge, because it's that skill set of being a great project director or program director is in short supply.
I guess on the other side of that, it would be a really nice problem to have.
It would be a nice problem to have, exactly.
Yeah. At GE, all the things I talked about that we're currently doing relative to capital projects is readying for that type of a situation, and we would participate directly in power and transportation, but I think indirectly, what that could do for our economy, for the U.S. economy, to me could be incredible. So I'll be the optimist.
If it could happen. So speaking of being the optimist, we'll go down the panel and see who's an optimist and who's a pessimist. So we've had a lot of discussion about a lot of things here, and there's been a lot of discussion about how our collective house is on fire. But maybe looking out to the future and all the things that are going on, and everybody's got a book of business, ongoing book of business. But do you see more positives or negatives for capital projects going forward? And we'll start with Greg, and maybe broaden it up to, will there be an increasing diversity of projects, and the industry is going to generally get better and figure it out? As Bruce said, we're going to be able to leverage all this data and collaborate, or we're going to see these costs continue to spiral out of control and we'll just get nothing built. So we'll start with Greg.
So I think there are 2 or 3 things that are extremely important. First, we need a very healthy business environment which addresses the regulatory environment, tax policy, to be able to be vibrant. Because as American people and as American companies, we have tremendous capability, ingenuity, the will to do things, but we can't be stifled by policies either at the federal or state level. So if we can make the changes, and maybe the best thing that we're seeing right now, at least the strangle that was put on us in the prior administration has been loosened. And even if we don't free up $1 trillion for infrastructure spending, if we can do things to lessen the burden of doing business so that we're more free to compete, because American people have tremendous will. And if you free up that will, we can do lots of really good things. So I'm optimistic that we have the potential to free up businesses to do things, and if we can do that, because in many ways we can be very, very competitive in a global economy. There is tremendous opportunity, but to me, I've always said to the people in our company, our biggest threat isn't competition, our biggest threat is the government. It's how they impact us, and it's in every single way. It's about, we talked about how people work. I mean, through things like the National Labor Relations Boards and the threats that we were under. For us, it's like the Chemical Safety Board and not following their mission of what was clearly established. It's everything. So I just think we need a very supportive government to help nurture and support American business.
Okay, good answer. All right, Karl, your perspective.
I would say there's positives and negatives. I think that the negatives are the headwinds that we're all realizing. The global economy, spinning reserves that are too large, oil price. Obviously, that's causing a contraction in our business, and it's also causing the contracting world to be a buyer's market. But I think it's causing all of us to get lean and mean, innovate, how to take engineering hours out of a project, how to take construction hours out of a project, modularization, all the things we're doing, so that when the economy does come back, and it will, this is one of the largest down cycles I've seen, but it will come back, and I think once it does come back, we're going to be ready for it. We better be ready for it, because it won't be a buyer's market any longer, and we'll have competition, and we'll be able to demonstrate what we can do. But I think it's both positive and negative. It's just a matter of timing.
Okay, Bruce, your thoughts?
I'm an optimist, and I think I touched on it earlier, and I think one of the things is technology and embracing some of the software tools and data analytics. You know, as an industry, I think we're way, way, way far behind. The Walmart guys had it figured out 15 years ago. Everybody knows what they buy, and you just look at our industry, we have been slow to embrace technology in really meaningful ways, and so I think with some of the things that we're doing, with some systems to give life cycle project control, so we have one version of the truth in near real time. I'm really excited about data analytics and creating some predictive algorithms. We actually have a couple of data scientists on our team that take our data and are trying to figure out from a predictive analytics. I think that's an area, if we embrace technology, we can drive down cost and understand the complex things that we're doing quicker and easier, and get that early warning so we can go do something about it and fix a problem before a small problem before it becomes a big one. So I'm excited about an area that this industry needs to really embrace is really embracing technology and data analytics and things of that nature.
Okay, good.
And then to build on that, our models now that we're making, and I think this is a thing that the owner industry needs to understand, is we no longer work in a industry where we make drawings. There are no drawings made. We're inputting data into models is how the work product is made, and how we can make it one source of truth, tie it into startup, commissioning, operations, and having all that tied together, and then even automate a lot of the mundane processes like wiring diagrams and all this part of the cycle of design that really don't add value to the end user or add value to the process is something that we're all doing. We've developed some software for linear projects, for transmission lines, pipelines, that's Google-based maps that does three-dimensional, so that a person on an iPad out in the construction can tell what work they did there, or they enter into a right-of-way, they'll click on it and it'll tell them exactly what they're supposed to do, who they're supposed to contact when they go on the right-of-way, whether that person's been cooperative or not, whether they should knock on the door or not, whether they take a tree down, whether they should chop it up and leave it there or pull it off the site. And all that ability to manage and harness data and keep it in one place and accessible to everybody mobily, that's the key. Accessible to everybody mobily is going to make our work product so much better. And I'm really excited, but I am 100% optimistic. I don't think we've had a better environment in a long time for the opportunity to build stuff. And I think the regulatory one, I think, is a classic. And I'll tell a short story that I told some of the panelists earlier is, I know somebody that's building a lake, and their one last hurdle to get over to build the dam was, why do you need the lake? And I think when government asks us why we want to do something on the property that we own and that we've done all the regulatory compliance, endangered species, everything, and followed 100% of the rules, and somebody asks you, well, why do you need it? We've gone too far. We've gone too far as a society. And I think I think we have an opportunity now that I think that's the most optimistic I've seen the industry. We were in lots of industries: transportation, power, oil and gas and chemicals, food and consumer products, and you name them. Every single one of our industries is at record sales for the first 6 months of the year. Every single one of them. And I think that's a good sign for the entire industry, the construction. We're usually on the front end, either doing front end planning or starting construction or conceptual designs on a lot of these projects, and including a lot of these are EPC projects. And those are all reaching really positive hurdles with our customers right now. So I think I'm as optimistic as I've ever been.
Good. Well, it's a good one to end on. So on behalf of CII, I want to thank Ray, Bruce, Karl, and Greg. Let's give them all a big round of applause. Thanks, guys. Thanks.